Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be doing a maintenance type repair on the rear axle. We're working on a old body style GMC 400 type truck, type of 3/4 ton type of hardware that you'd see on the rear chassis. And what we're looking at here is these U-bolts that secure the rear leaf spring to the rear axle. What you can see happening here, if we zoom in where this pick is, we can see that over time corrosion attacks these bolts and weakens them. So you can see this, all this material is actually the bolt corroding and flaking off, right? And so what you have happen here is the bolt becomes unsafe. It's going to snap at some point. Now if we take a look here with the mirror and we look at the light, you can see this whole cavity here if we zoom in, and what we see in the mirror is all full of dirt, and that holds moisture and anything you get off the road like salt, if you're in one of those areas where they salt the roads, and that sits in there and attacks these U-bolts and eventually eats through them. So that is today's job. For a job like this, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get the vehicle slightly off the ground so that we can take the pressure off the spring, and then we're going to work on wire wheeling these threads, PB blasting them so that we can get these nuts off. Fortunately, the threads and the nuts look okay. Can't tell about the hanger yet until we get a look inside, but we definitely got to tackle replacing the U-bolt. So that's today's job. So let's get this jacked up and on some stands and get started. All right, guys, just for comparison before we pull the other one, here's another truck, not the same year, but the same equipment. It's also, this is a 3/4 ton old body style truck. And you can see here, this is what you want to see, right? Surface corrosion is normal, but you don't want to see any flaking and peeling of the steel, which is showing that you've got rust through and it's corroding all the way through the structure of the metal. The other thing you want to see is when you take a look at with the mirror and you look inside these cavities, we zoom into the mirror on this guy, we can see it's all empty, right? There shouldn't be any dirt accumulated in here that would be corroding this bolt. What's normally supposed to happen is the water drains out, but you don't want to get dirt in there, because once the dirt clogs up the draining system, then it starts to accumulate and it starts to hold the moisture, and then the moisture plus any chemicals on the road is what attacks the steel. Normally when these trucks were first rolling off the assembly line, you can kind of see it on this guy, because this is a Southern truck that's never saw any road salt. It was painted black. It's like a black kind of it's very cheap kind of paint, right? It's not even enamel. If anything, I'd say it's like an asphalt-based paint, but at least these years. So all of this really had a shot of black paint on it. But at this point, all of that's worn off. But this is 25, 26 years old. It's still fine. We don't need to replace anything on this one. So that's just for comparison. This is not the cosmetics that you're worried about. It's the structural damage that you're worried about. All right, guys, so how do you tell these apart, right? Because there's a left and a right, and they look on the surface to be very much the same. Now, this pair here I pulled from the salvage yard as spares because we don't know what condition ours are going to be in for these anchors. But you can tell them apart. And if you look at it on the bottom, you can see that there are markings on the bottom. And actually, the numbers are cast into here, or stamped into here, right? So left-hand side, this is the driver's side, 1559. 2587. And then similarly for the passenger side, all this one's more worn, right hand 1559298, right? Or 2588 rather. So it's hard to make them out completely, but there is a right and a left side. Now what's different about the right and left side? What you'll find out if you put them together with the sides that have the part numbers stamped in, what you'll see is that these arcs that sit on the axle housing tube are exactly the same, right? The cut of the arc. I'm trying to get it here so you can see, because there's a little bit of a defect on this one. Got hit or something, right? But they're exactly the same. And if we turn it around to the side opposite that doesn't have the numbers stamped in it, they're the same. But if I flip them, they're different. You see? It's about 1 millimeter or 2 different size. And similarly, if I flip this one around, So I got the writing on this side. This doesn't have the writing. I got the writing on this side. Same thing. So you can see, line this guy up. It's about 2 millimeters different. So they are different. You can't put the right on the right on the left, or the left on the right. So when we take these off, we'll see the correct orientation for how they go when we put them back on. But I thought I'd spend some time to show you that. Now, one other thing I'll show you on this guy. So these two that I took off of a 99 Suburban 2500 at the salvage yard with a gasoline engine. Same equipment that we have on this vehicle with the diesel engine, even though it's a 1500. These are for the larger axles. That's these numbers are for the larger axles. When I talk about the part numbers, I'll put in the description the part numbers for both types. We can see this this right-hand one, this passenger side one, is really in good shape, right? You can tell by the thickness of the bolt, the U-bolt hole openings. Is not really damaged by corrosion. There's no heavy pitting. It's very light. We did a little bit of superficial scratching to get past this. This is the original paint where it made contact with the axle tube, and you can get bare steel really easily there. We take one of my welding chipping hammers, and we come in here and we tap around, and we try to see if we can find weak spots in the corrosion. You can see there's very superficial pitting that occurs when you go and knock these flaky pieces off. This is all like totally normal and expected, right? Just very small things. It's nothing like what you're going to see. I'm sure when we pull the originals off, it's going to be significantly worse than this. So this is completely reusable, and this is a passenger side one. This driver's side one, you can see where I've kind of chipped this out. This one had significantly more damage on the one side than the other. So on this side, it's pretty much like that passenger side one, just very minor corrosion, right? Little tiny bits of flakes that you might be able to get off. However, on this side, you can see there was significant pitting. I've already chipped this out. Now this one also, I believe, to be reusable. And it is pitted, but it's not as bad. Now, why would you even think about reusing something like this? Well, because the left-hand side ones are discontinued by GM. In fact, the better aftermarket ones also discontinued the left-hand side. I'm not sure why. Everybody kind of abandoned the left-hand side. I'll put a couple of aftermarket numbers in the description as well if you want to consider that, although I definitely prefer the GM ones. But nobody's got one for the driver's side in this large axle size. You can still get both sides in the smaller axle for the gasoline-powered 1500s, though. All right, guys. Tool approach wise, you're just going to need a jack stand, and you're going to want to get one that's got a nice curve in the top part, because we're going to be laying the axle tube in this curve. But we're basically going to jack her up, going to take the tension off the leaf spring, and then we're going to work our jack stand underneath the tube one side at a time. You're going to do one side at a time on these, removing these U-bolts and anchors, because you want to keep the drive shaft in alignment. If you take them both off, there's too much of a chance you can change that, right? So do one side, get that done, then we'll switch to the other side using just one jack stand. All right, guys, here's the setup we've got, right? We've jacked up, you can see over in the background, we've jacked up from the frame to get the wheel off the ground to take some tension off the spring, and then we've gotten a jack stand underneath the axle to try and capture that. You're not going to get it exact because of the granularity of the jack stand, but we got it very close, right? We've got the wheel just slightly off the ground. You can choose to take the tire and the wheel off if you want to work from these nuts from outside the brake drum. I don't mind working from them over here by the exhaust on this side, and that's fine. So the next thing we're going to do is going to wire off these threads to try and make an easier job of getting these nuts off. In our case, these nuts are pretty good. We can reuse these nuts, and I believe we can reuse these washers. I'll include all these part numbers in the description below, but we're mostly just after replacing the U-bolts here. So let's go ahead and wire wheel this off, and then make sure you got some goggles on, and then we'll give it a shot of PB Blaster. That's how you want to do all four of these. I'm just going to show you this one here, right? But the whole idea here we want to do is we want to get all that rusty dust that you see off of the threads, and then we want to try and break the seal between the nut and the washer and the hanger. Let some of that stuff, this PB Blaster, soak in. We'll do the other 3. We'll come back and we'll start trying to zip them off very carefully. All right, guys, let's take a look at the driver's side. So I've already chipped away some of the corrosion. It's not much better. In fact, it may be worse than what we're looking at on the passenger side. But we can see, there's some pitting into the axle tube itself, and then we can see the neck effect on these bolts, particularly on this side. It's kind of a shadow with our light on this side. Let me see if I can move that for you. Yeah, so you can see how it's necked down on both sides. And then you have this pitting all along the top edge over to this bolt here and then along the other side. Now, fortunately, I've picked away at this. This pitting doesn't look that bad. It's not anything I'm concerned about. It might be at most 1 millimeter. Maybe in some spots we might be able to get to 2 millimeters. You got to remember on this particular truck, this is a 14 bolt rear end. If we pan over to the right a little bit and zoom out, you can see this is a much larger differential cover than the half-ton truck normally has because it's got a diesel engine. So it's got a 14 bolt, 9.5-inch ring gear, semi-floating axle. So what does that mean for this particular video? Well, that means that this tube, this axle tube that we're talking about that's corroded, this guy is about somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/8 of an inch thick. So a couple of millimeters is no concern whatsoever. What we got to do is we've got to get this anchor plate off and see if it's any worse underneath, right? Because we've got this same problem with the accumulated dirt in here, right? So we'll go ahead and do the same thing we did on the passenger side. We'll wire wheel off the threads so that they have an easier time of coming off. And we'll go ahead and come back to this one after we get done with the passenger side. All right, guys, we've let our PB Blaster set up here for a while. You're going to need a 21 millimeter socket, and it's going to need to be a deep socket to clear the length of this thread. What we're going to be doing is an X pattern. We're going to do this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. That's assuming we can get it off. All right, so right there is why we're changing these. If we zoom in up here, you can see how badly corroded this was, is such that it was ready to snap, and it did, just trying to get this off. So that's how bad the corrosion is. So we're probably going to have this problem on trying to get the others out as well. You can see it's just full of sand and debris that contributed to this problem. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go in the back and try to get one of the ones in the back out. Well, that one, guys, is not wanting to come off. So maybe we'll just go after this one instead. All right, guys, these are really rusted on here. Let's see if we can give it a shot with a breaker bar before we switch to cutting these bolts. All right, guys, that's 2. So not necessarily going to film all this because there's nothing to see. We're just going to have to break these off. We'll get the other 2, and we'll show you what it looks like when we pull out the U-bolts. All right, guys, you saw it live, right? So this is, exactly the kind of problem when we noticed that this vehicle had that corrosion that you saw at the beginning. So these will have to be replaced, and they're going to be replaced by 1552 9596. Right, so you can see they come bare steel like this, but like the other truck I showed you, they're sufficiently thick that if you don't have this going on, that's okay. So we got 2 for each side, and what we're going to have to do over here is kind of sandblast all this out. So I'll show you what I get done here, but you know, maybe we have corrosion in here that's a problem. I don't know yet. See, there's a lot of material that has, you know, caked up like that, right? And so we have to figure out, is this been weakened or not? Now, if it has, this side here, each side's a different part number. This side on the one we're working on here is a 1559 2588 on the passenger side, and that's what the new ones look like. And so we'll be going through here and just trying to see, have we lost any of the thickness of the original one? Now, if we have, then we'll use one of these, but if we haven't, then this is reusable. And similarly, we'll aim to reuse these washers because there's nothing wrong with those. They have not had any pitting or corrosion, but if yours are shot, I can put part numbers in the description for those as well, and we'll see if we can salvage these nuts, although we probably won't be able to because the nuts themselves aren't corroded, but you know, the corrosion has attacked along the top here, so we're probably going to have to replace these nuts as well. So let me get this cleaned up and see what shape it's in, and then we'll also take a shot of the axle and we'll see what that looks like too, because we're going to have to clean all that up as well. All right, guys, let me just kind of show you the technique I've been using to get this prepped and assessed on whether we can salvage it. Now, one of the things you do is you come in here with a chisel and you're trying to get any scaled rust that might still be there to come off. And this is what I've been doing for a little while, so there's really not much left. But that's just a technique. You can see there's a few little pieces that just chipped off there. You want to do this until you can't get anything to chip off. And similarly, I'll show you in a minute, you have to do that on the axle as well, because where this was touching the rear axle, there's going to be some pitting from this as well. The other thing is to go through with a pick and try to look for any loose pieces. I've done that already as well. Another technique is to come in, you can either use a ball peen hammer or also a welding hammer, just to kind of come in here and see if you can break up any scaled pieces, and then wire brush it. See, what you're looking for is you're trying to get back down to bare steel. When you get back down to bare steel, then you're at a point where you can kind of salvage this and put a coat of a rust converter on it, and then a paint coat, and you can salvage it. If you know, compare it to the new one, this is a 1/4 inch piece of steel, right? So it's going to take a lot to ruin it. If it gets compromised, it can crack or break when you torque it, right? So that's what you're trying to do. Now you might say, well, you got a new one, why don't you just put it on? Well, the axle is in similar shape, and this truck doesn't have a whole lot of life on it, but the axle, if there should be something wrong and it should penetrate and cause a leak, I'm going to probably save this spare part for that. Now this is the passenger side, like I mentioned earlier. They've discontinued the driver's side for many, many, many years. So we're going to have to salvage the driver's side anyway. I don't like the aftermarket ones. They're not cut the same. They're kind of universal. So, you know, as always with aftermarket parts, you get what you pay for. We were able to salvage all of our original nuts, so we don't have to buy those. If yours are shot, though, like I said, I'll put the part numbers in the description. We were able to soak these with the broken off pieces of the old U-bolt and eventually get it to come loose. Now we're going to give a shot of paint on this vulnerable piece of the lower area of the new U-bolts before we put them in, just to give them a better lease on life. Let me take you underneath and show you what it looks like on the axle area. All right, guys, if we zoom in here to this axle area, you can see that underneath we're pretty good shape, but you can see the pitting here and here. We use that same chipping technique to make sure that the corrosion has not penetrated the axle into the housing area. If it had, then the axle would be shot. It would either have to be welded up and repaired or replaced. So we're okay so far there. We've hit it with some rust converter, and then we've put a top coat of flat black enamel on it to try and give it some more life. We're just going to get ready to reinstall everything now. I'm going to run our new U-bolts back down into position. Make sure you get them in the correct spot on the top. We're going to go put the one on the back end, and then we're going to bring our hanger back over, and I'll show you what the torque values are. Guys, here's a view from the top of the leaf spring, just showing the correct position for the U-bolts on the top. You can see that the flat portions are going to be sitting inside of this little indentation on this top bracket. So you want to make sure you get them in the right spot, right? You don't want to get them over here, and you don't want to get them in the middle. All right, guys, we got this rust restore treated, and then we give it a shot of a semi-gloss top coat, but I'm really not happy with how it came out. There's just a lot of pitting on this original piece. You know, on the bottom side, it's so corroded we can't even make out those part numbers, left-hand, right-hand side anymore. That just gives you the extent of how much metal has been lost in the corrosion process. We could either go with the one that we got from the salvage yard, which is in much nicer condition than this, or we could just go with our new one. And I think what I'm going to do is, since I've got this and our axle housing is in pretty good shape, we're just going to put the new one on there. So let's go ahead and show you how to get that mounted. All right, guys, let's take a look at what the service manual says about the procedure. We're working on a 99 truck, which is a carryover model that's still a CK GMT 400 old body style. Make sure you don't get the wrong manual, because this is when the new body style started as well. If we look at the rear suspension section, what we're interested in is this area here and replacing, right? So do not use the old U-bolts. There's a reason for that guidance. They talk about installing them in the top, putting the anchor plate washers and nuts on, and then they talk about tightening the U-bolt nuts in the sequence shown to 81 foot-pounds. So the sequence shown is an X pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's exactly what we're going to go do. All right, guys, so we're going to put this new guy in with the part number. The part number is stamped in under the sticker towards the brake drum wheel. Now, fortunately, we already test-fitted our U-bolts, and we're not going to need to worry about them being too wide or too narrow. Just want to get this guy to fit in the holes without knocking it off our little perch up on top. All right. And then it's just a matter of working the washers and nuts on by hand. We're just going to tighten these up and hold it in this position. Just need to get one of these going here so we can have it quit popping off the bracket up on the top of the leaf spring. And these nuts should go on as smooth as you see here. If not, you need to take a look at the nuts if you're reusing the old ones, or checking the threads on the U-bolts, because it should just go on hand tight, just like this. All right. All right, so we got it sitting on that perch, and we're trying to line up to make sure that we're on the witness marks of where the old anchor plate was, and then we're just going to tighten it up to hold it in position. And it's important just to get it on with the old one, was because when we have these kind of corrosion problems, we want to keep it on the strongest piece of the steel of the axle tube, and that would be where those marks were. All right, so we're just going to leave a little bit of slack here, get it where we want it, and we're going to take a regular ratchet wrench. We're going to use that same X pattern that we torqued to, but for this time we're just going to snug. All right, now I'm going to go pop up on top, just do one last check to make sure we're in the right spot on the top, and then we'll come back down and we'll X-torque it. All right, so that pattern was against the brake drum, either 1, 2, 3, 4, or it can be 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't matter which way you start.
81 foot-pounds. There's one. That's two. At least with a new anchor like this, we don't have to worry about any of this torque in operation cracking anything. That's just the bolt. I mean, the nut making some sounds on the threads. We haven't torqued it yet. She's just giving some squeaks. And that's fine. You don't want to lubricate anything, you won't get the right torque. Now we got the 81 foot-pounds. Last one, and you'll end up where you started, with the one against the brake drum. I think that was it. Let's just double check. Yep, all right, we are done with the passenger side. Let's go deal with the driver's side now.
All right, guys, here's our setup on the driver's side, very similar to what we did on the passenger side. We've got our jack stand sitting on the axle tube. We learned our lesson on the passenger side, so we're going to take a different approach for removing these nuts off these U-bolts on the driver's side. What I'm going to be using is I'm going to be using a bolt buster, which is an inductive heater. It will be comparable to using a torch without having to mess around with the torch flame. I'm going to be putting this guy on these nuts. Going to get them cherry red, and then we're going to take the impact wrench and try to spin them off that way, and that hopefully will reduce the torsional forces on these weakened U-bolts, and we can get the thing off intact. You know, best case, it works the way I'm describing. Worst case, it turns out to be the same thing as what you already saw on the passenger side. So I'm not going to show all of these because there's nothing really to see there. I'll just show a couple of them. Let me get set up and get the tool plugged in, and I'm not going to narrate this piece. Make sure you get some eye protection on if you go this route, and some hearing protection for the ear impact wrench. Just waiting for it to heat up, guys. So a lot of steel. Let's see if we can nudge it any yet. Let's give it a little bit more. All right, I'm going to leave these on the end so we don't have hot nuts laying around, but that's the technique I'm going to use to get all four of these off. All right, guys, last one. All right. So we're just going to let these cool, and we're going to take them off, and we'll drop down this anchor plate. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and drop this down. Sufficiently cooled off to touch now because we don't see any smoking of the penetrating fluid. She's full of crap, just like the other ones. I wanted to get these off intact, so I'm show you what it looks like before it breaks. Much easier than what we went through on the passenger side because we heated this up. This one's going to fight us all the way to the bottom. All right. All right, the front one looks like he wants to come off. Here we go. Wow. Dust mask. So there you go, guys. That's how badly corroded these bolts are. And they would have easily snapped. Just like what we had happen on the passenger side. It's an awful lot of dust. What we're trying to do is just get it to let go without causing any extra damage. So I don't know how weakened this axle tube is going to end up being. Go grab a bigger hammer, guys. I'm also going to take this paint marker. Just want to make a mark on the side that's inboard because I'm curious to see which side is going to have the part number stamped into it from the factory originally because this has never been taken off. All right, let's finish this off with a larger hammer. Can't even breathe down here, guys. It's a really bad design, quite frankly. I presume it's corroded inside the back piece of the anchor. Right, so you can see there's already some surface corrosion on here. Can't tell how bad it is yet. But I certainly don't want to bang on it too hard. Alright guys, actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zip that U-bolt that's stuck off with our cut-off wheel to save a little bit of time. I think you guys get the idea what these look like when they're corroded, so there's no reason for me to try and save it. Alright guys, let's get this piece off of here. Sometimes you just got to cut things off. Alright, you can see that this guy is necked down pretty bad too. And this piece is just for whatever reason kind of welded itself into the anchor. So we're going to have to chip this away before we can determine if this anchor is reusable or not. And then we'll get under here and we'll chip this corrosion off of here and just see what we've got. when we're finally done. I'll kind of show you the technique because I don't think I showed it to you on the passenger side. Let me get the chipping hammer over here. That's what I would start with. Just come in with something like this. Just get all of this weak material to flake off. That's how we're going to tell, you know, what the damage is. There's nothing leaking, thank goodness. But we're going to have to see if that holds up as we chip this stuff off. And you could also use the technique that I showed with the passenger side anchor plate with a ball peen hammer and a small chisel. Either way, you're just trying to get all of this flaky material off so you can get a good feel of what the extent of the pitting is before you start getting into solid metal. So I'm going to continue to chip this away, and we'll come back and take a look at what we're left with. All right, guys, so we've got her separated from the welded on washer. Here's where we made our yellow paint mark. We wire wheeled this off enough where you can see there's the part number like we showed on the earlier version for the left hand side, and so clearly the part number always faces the tire is how they've mounted these. We've been chipping away at this, and I'm just going to show you this technique, right, with the chipping hammer, or you can use like I use on the passenger side. I showed a different technique with the ball peen and a chisel. But you can see what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove this flaky disintegration that's occurring. You know, so wherever you see that, you're just going to continue to chip away with it. Right? So you definitely want to wear hearing protection for this, and you definitely want to wear eye protection for this. But you can see as we continue to go through here and chip this away, we're just going to take layer after layer after layer off until we get to good metal. Now, looking at it so far, especially in these corners, we can see there's significantly more of this flaking to chip away. And so I think on this one, I'm probably not going to spend any more time on the original one trying to restore it. Again, you can't buy a new one for the left hand because it's discontinued. So this is why we had the donor from the salvage yard. It's in much better shape than the one we're working with here. What we really want to particularly pay attention to is the thickness where the nuts are going to be torqued down. And on this one, these two are definitely fine. These two have some pitting, but they're still relatively thick around where the bolts are going to go. It's kind of, you know, it's very thick on this side, not as thick on that side, unfortunately. But we can see on this one, right, we're already heading down a worse direction. So you got to use your best judgment, right, because it's just a hunk of steel, but it's very important in the sense that this is what's going to have to keep those U-bolts in position whenever you're carrying a load or whenever you're hitting, you know, railroad track or heavy gravel, dirt road, anything that's going to put a lot of stress back here. You definitely don't want to be marginal. So let me show you on the axle tube itself where we got and how we're going to treat that. All right, guys, so here's where we're at with the axle tube. And we're zoomed in here to show you this. You can see it's all peppered with these small silver dots. That's from our chipping hammer or the corner of our chisel as appropriate. Nothing corroded on the bottom. Of course, you got everything packed up against this, so it can't really corrode, thank goodness. The back is not really anywhere near as much as the front, but like we predicted earlier on in the video, these pits, now we finally got back to good metal. In some places, they're at most 2 millimeters thick, right? This is probably the deepest one right here. This one's probably about the same. The rest is very superficial. We have nothing penetrating through the tube itself, so we're in good shape. So what do we do to kind of protect what we've got left? Well, I didn't show it on the other side, but I'll show it on this side, right? So I use this product here, Rust-Oleum Rust Reformer. This is just a liquid. Basically, just shake this guy up. I'll show you what it looks like here. Use a small bowl. You don't need a lot. It comes out like a milky material like that. And what this does, you just brush this stuff on as if it were paint. And what this does is it converts the iron oxide into more of a phosphate type coating and basically stops the corrosion. So you don't want to sand too much when you're doing this, because these types of products actually require corrosion to set up. So we're going to coat this, and then we're going to go back on the other side and coat the other side. And then when it dries, it'll be like a black color. And when it's all dried up, we'll give it a shot of paint to protect it, and then we'll be ready to reassemble. All right, guys, just like on the passenger side, we want to make sure these two U-bolts are sitting in on top of the bracket grooves like I showed you over there. We've given a shot of black paint to the vulnerable area of these U-bolts, bare steel, and now we're trying to reposition the anchor to where it goes. So what we're looking for is you want to take note of the witness marks where it originally lined up. You want to try and get it back in the same spot just because of the corrosion situation. Remember that the stamped part number side is going to face the brake drum. So we're just going to hold this up against that witness mark. And you should be able to turn these in by hand. And if you can't, then you need to go figure out why. And then all we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do that same X pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4 to 81 foot-pounds, just like the passenger side. So let me go do that, and then we'll take a step back and look at the finished product. All right, guys, we're all done with this job. This is an example of one of those kind of things that a vehicle only gets done once in its life. You know, by the time this particular problem would ever be needed again, this vehicle would probably either be in need of a new rear axle or be on its way to the crusher or to be scrapped. It just wouldn't have any life left in it. This way, we've given it as many years as we can. Maintenance-wise, I think the best way to avoid this problem, and I'm going to talk to the owner, is to make sure that whenever the tires are rotated, that you kind of reach in here and try to blow any dirt out of these anchor plates. That's probably the best way to keep that moisture from getting trapped in there and avoid this problem. But the treatment we did with these products should be a lot better than it was original factory. And so here we are sitting 24 years later, and we were able to just have to replace these U-bolts. We went with the salvage yard anchor plate on the driver's side because they don't make the replacement. And of course, on the passenger side, we just elected to use a new one because we had it. So there's the driver's side. And if we slowly pan over here to where we started on the passenger side, right, we're all wrapped up and done. So guys, I hope this video helped you out with this particular problem. I will put the part numbers for both this particular size axle and the parts you saw me use here, as well as the smaller half-ton gasoline engine axle. It's exactly the same procedure, just smaller parts. Same torque values even on the nuts. So if this video helped you out, take a moment to pay it forward and hit that like button. I really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.